Great, thanks, Priscilla. Next up, we have Matt Labrenz with University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you to you all for inviting me to be here today. Very happy to be here. I'm going to be talking with you about the new Alaska lumber grading program. My name is Matt Labrenz. I'm a forest product specialist with University of Alaska Cooperative Extension Service. I'm working to develop the Alaska lumber grading program, which is a collaborative effort with the DNR Division of Forestry and Fire Protection. And I want to open up by having you all imagine a little scenario. So imagine that you're building a home in a location or a situation in which building codes are enforced for residential construction. You own a sawmill, have access to locally harvested spruce logs, and you want to mill the lumber and use it to build the house frame. Would this be allowed? I want you all to take a moment to consider that question, come up with your answer. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. Spruce seems like a pretty good construction wood. You've got the mill.
I got the answer.
Well, I want everyone to hold it in their head because it's revealed on the next slide. Everyone's got it. Right now, you cannot. But don't worry, you will be able to. So we'll get into that. So my hope for this presentation is to explain what the Alaska lumber grading program is, and also give background as to why one is desired or needed in the state. So the reason that the answer for right now in this present moment in time that the answer is no is because if you are in a scenario where building codes enforced for residential construction, then the lumber that you use in the house frame needs to be grade mark lumber. And so this accredited grade mark whole infrastructure, it's a good system. It ensures that the lumber that is used in a structural application is suitable for that purpose. So it's a good thing. On the other hand, like any good thing, it has some limitations or some trade-offs. And the main trade-off is that it's a costly system to participate in some situations. So while it's possible to get grade mark lumber in Alaska, either by importing it from Canada, the lower 48, or by purchasing it from one of the small number of mills that does have certified lumber graders on staff and pays to have membership in the system. In other situations, particularly I would say in rural Alaska, probably many parts of Southeast Alaska, it's logistically difficult and costly to get that lumber where it's wanted to build a home frame. So the question becomes, why can't a person who's surrounded by this great resource of spruce and hemlock lumber and other species of suitable building lumber and has the ability to mill it into dimension lumber for building house frame, why can't they do that? And it turns out that Alaska is not the only state to identify this as an issue. So other states have created local lumber use programs, and some of those examples are up here on the screen. And these aren't the only ones, there are more. To my knowledge, Wisconsin was sort of the progenitor of this concept. I think they're the first, I don't actually know that. But what I do know is that they definitely laid, just keep my hands off the button here. They certainly laid the groundwork to create a really quality program and infrastructure for a local use lumber program. And for instance, I know Tennessee closely based their program off of Wisconsin's, and we certainly closely based our program off of Wisconsin's as well. So to recap, the need for a local use lumber program in Alaska has been identified both by Division of Forestry, other individuals, citizens of the state, got legislative support. A bill was drafted that was signed into law. The statute is listed up here on this slide if you're interested in digging into the statute. And it was passed into law last year in August 2023. And just to review, the whole objective of this is to allow more Alaskans to build their homes with locally sawn lumber. And so to that end, the program establishes this set of substitute equivalent grading rules. And I'll talk more about what that means. And then the program offers a training and certification system so that people can learn to apply those grading rules and produce gradable lumber that can be used in home building. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, yeah, to make this point clear, because I think the point needs to be made based on questions that have come up in other contexts. But the program doesn't produce lumber. It offers a lumber grading training that individuals voluntarily sign up for to learn to grade lumber. And then also, just to answer some maybe clarifying questions right off the bat, this program applies to within the state of Alaska. So the lumber is produced in the state of Alaska, and if it's used in the state of Alaska, and if it's sold to other Alaskans using it in Alaska. So you can't sell the lumber outside of the borders. So it's a within Alaska program. This applies to light frame wood home assemblies, or just frame wooden home frames like the one pictured here. It applies to dimension lumber. And what that means is lumber that is between 2 to 4 inches thick and 2 inches and wider. And it applies to structural lumber. So only lumber that is used in load-bearing applications in residential house frames. And then Alaska softwoods are the type of trees that can be used to produce lumber that's allowed in this program. So kind of the corollary to all of that is that this does not apply to lumber produced outside of Alaska. Buildings that don't meet the appropriate definition of a residence this lumber can't be used for that. If it's non-structural lumber, it doesn't apply. So for instance, this nice paneling on the walls here, or if it's siding for a house, or other framing members like blocking and such, that's not a load-bearing framing member. This is not relevant to this program. Timbers or logs are outside of the purview of this. This is, timbers and logs are graded, but this isn't about grading timbers or logs. It's just grading structural dimension lumber. And hardwoods are not used in this program. And I won't go too deep into that, but if you're wondering why not, I've got access to birch. What if I wanted to build my house frame out of birch? There is science behind that, and it just has to do with the wood molecules, the difference between softwoods and hardwoods. So the wood molecules in softwoods, which are called tracheids, they're form these longer fibers, and they end up being really ideal for the strength properties that are needed in a house frame. Also being soft, they accept fasteners better. So for both of those reasons, softwoods are just really ideal for light frame wood home assemblies. So in this next section, I thought it would be important, if you're not familiar, to kind of pick apart what exactly a grade is, because that's really what this program is all about. So to say what a grade is, you really have to understand its place in a system that involves, among other things, design values, and then also the building code. So that's what this gear illustration is meant to show, which we'll go back to as we kind of take a quick look at each of these. But to understand that these all work together, and they don't really work in isolation. They're kind of meaningless, isolated from each other. So starting with design values, just a basic definition is that they're data that convey wood strength properties. So if you think about the word strength in wood as a material, it's things where it's actually so vague that it's sort of meaningless, because are you saying is the type of strength important if a force is applied horizontally perpendicular to the grain, or is strength for wood in compression, such as say a sill plate that has a lot of weight on top of it and is being compressed against the foundation, maybe it needs to be strong in that way. So saying like, is that type of wood strong doesn't really mean anything. You have to contextualize it a little bit. So for that reason, to design values for any given species of wood, data are calculated based on physical tests that apply stress to wood in all these different ways, including the ones that I just mentioned, and others. And the typical way that this is done is, what wood do you choose to use in this test to get accurate information? Because of course, not all wood is unique. That's what we love about it. So to keep things standardized, a clear sample, so a defect-free section of wood of a standardized size is used in all the testing to keep all the information consistent across the infrastructure. So this is what a schedule of design values looks like. So I know this is tiny, but to just explain this a little bit, as you can see in the vertical columns, this is showing these figures, which are measured in pounds per square inch of the maximum amount of force that that sample was able to withstand based on the type of test. So there's all these different ones, horizontal shear, and you can see them here. Elasticity is another one. You can also see that if you look in these horizontal boxes, they're different for each species, because of course, each species is going to have different strength properties. And then if you look really close, you'll also see that in the horizontal rows, that there's different figures for each grade. So as I said, all of these concepts. So that brings us to grades. So a short definition is that they're categorizations of lumber according to material defects that affect performance under load. And so all of these defects, the important thing about them is essentially how they displace the direction of grain. Because if you just had a perfect sample of clear lumber with uninterrupted grain, that would sort of be the ideal, most strong piece of wood. But anything that presents an interruption to that, like a grain, or sorry, a knot, which causes the grain to change direction and flow around it as the tree grows, that's an interruption in the chain or in that grain direction that compromises the performance of the piece of lumber in that section of the wood. So there's an entire huge system of grading structural lumber that identifies everything that causes a displacement of grain, and then all of the different grades. So for example, you might have heard of number 1, number 2, select structural, economy, stud, all of these different grades that are intended for different purposes. They're all saying that given the defects present in a piece of lumber, they're sufficient to perform as expected for this grade. Okay, so the last piece of this system that I got is building codes. And so I've got a picture here, which is a table copied right out of the International Residential Code. And as you can see, if you are given a type of structural member in a house frame design, and a situation, what I mean by that is, you could have a ceiling joist, but the design could be such that the ceiling is, or sorry, a rafter. The design could be such that the ceiling is attached to the rafter or not. That just varies by different home designs. So that's going to change how the size of framing member that you need. So if you're given the structural member, joist, stud, rafter, whatnot, the situation, the span that you're trying to achieve, the spacing. So in a lot of cases, components of a house frame use a concept called like repetitive design. So like wall studs that are spaced 16-inch on center, or floor joists that are spaced 24 inches on center. So that lends a lot of strength to the whole system, especially when all those things are attached with sheathing. So that's taken into account. The species of lumber that's used is taken into account. So with all those things being given, then you could then work backwards in this sort of multivariable equation and see what grade you would need to use. So that's how the building code fits into this puzzle. So what the Alaska Lumber Grading Program is an alternative to that system of grading lumber. It's like we started out in this presentation that there's situations, especially in rural areas, where it might be cost prohibitive or logistically prohibitive to import or produce grade mark lumber. This creates an alternative. So we've established a set of grading rules for 3 grades that correspond to the grade mark infrastructure. And by name, they're Alaska number 2 and better, Alaska stud, and Alaska number 3. And as I said, they correspond to 3 grades from the grade stamp infrastructure. And the grading rules, the limiting characteristics that are used, or the rules that say how much defect is permitted to make a certain grade, they intentionally very closely approximate the limiting rules that come from the grade mark infrastructure. But in some cases for intentional reasons. One of them is when a modification is made, it makes making that grade a little bit tougher, or in other words, it's more conservative. And that makes learning the system easier, and it makes applying it in the field easier. And that's important for teaching this to people who come and learn it in a one-day training. It makes that possible. And that's in contrast to the grade mark infrastructure, where it might be a higher priority to produce as much material of as high of a grade as possible for the greatest economic benefit. In our case, we're looking for ensuring the structural integrity of the framing member being a higher priority. So that's kind of the theory behind some of the modifications that are made in our limiting rules. So we will be offering a grading training, and this is a one-day training. It will be, at least initially, taught by me, and it is free. Any individual Alaskan can sign up for the training, and it'll be offered annually in at least a location in interior central east. And then, of course, as demand and interest warrants, we can accommodate other locations. In the training, you'll get a bit of wood science and information about material characteristics of wood as a framing material, to just gain an appreciation and understanding of why the grading rules are the way that they are, to aid in applying them. And then we'll go through all of the exact grading rules for each of the 3 grades, explain all other rules and provisions of the program, and then participants will do some grading practice, and then they'll take a certification test. And assuming passage of the test, participants will walk away with a certification. It's valid for 5 years. And that's what allows you to self-grade lumber that you mill, which you can then personally use to build in a residential house frame. Or there's also provisions that allow you to sell it, and lots of information needs to be documented. And you'd need to include a copy of your certificate, but then you could sell it to an end user. So not a home center, but you could sell it to another person who's going to build their house, or if they're working with a contractor, that deal can be brokered through their contractor as well. And then I guess just also important to note, of course, as a precaution, that certification is revocable should that prove necessary. And right now we have 2 open training opportunities. So you could go to the website and sign up for these right now. On the books currently, we have in June at the Matanuska Experiment Farm and Extension Center in Palmer. We've got an offering, and then following that in July, we've got a training in Prince of Wales. So both of these are live and open for registration. And that is the end, except that I want to end saying that part of the reason that I was excited to come down here is just to interact with and connect with people who might want to set up a training in Sitka. That's absolutely a possibility if the demand is here. So if any of you know anyone that I should be talking with in my remaining time here, please let me know about that.
Quick question. Will, I assume, does the legislation address anything about, will financial institutions that are lenders recognize the standards for financing purposes?
Legislation doesn't have specific language about that, but that work is being fielded, and they are Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is supportive, And so to finalize this and make this program as widely applicable across the state as possible, we do need municipalities who enforce building code to incorporate amendments that will allow for this. But I can speak for the HFC. They have expressed support to write an amendment for this.
Didn't they write in their minimum construction standards, or they recognize this as being meeting their minimum construction standards?
I believe it already has been.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're outside of a borough or municipality that requires minimum construction, you could get financing for it
Great.
Through Alaska Finance.
through Alaska Housing Finance.
Yeah, probably not. Federal.
I got a couple questions.
Yeah.
What is your class size limits look like right now?
Yeah, so right now I've capped the training at 20 participants. And that's could be adjusted as we roll this out. As I said, this is a new program. That June training in Palmer, that's going to be the first ever training offered to the public. And we certainly want to get a sense that people understand the grading rules and that when we send them out, that they'll be applied accurately. So that's the reason behind the cap. Of course, if we offer a training and it's in remote location and it's only offered once a year, a couple more people want to sign up, I think would be reasonable in that situation. But right now the cap is 20.
All right, my other question, your exam, what level of math does it look like right now?
To give you an example, like if you are grading something, like say this is a piece of lumber that you're grading, knots are one of the main defects that you're assessing. So like you've got barely a knot right there. So the rule will say to make number 2 and better grade that the knot can't exceed 25% of the nominal width. So if this is a board that I'm grading, it's attempting to be a 2x6. So you'd have to be able to calculate 25% of 6. That's about as hard as that gets on that.
All right, good.
Yeah, another question is, so this certification is only for certifying the lumber that the certificate owner is milling. So there is no, that a grader could go grade another person's production.
The certification goes with the individual. So I suppose that
No,
Okay. And you don't want to, you don't have to explain.
I can later if you want, but it's.